Hey guys, it's Bank about PC Gaming here. I want to talk a little bit about monitors when it comes to size and refresh rate. Now I personally game on a 3440 by 1440 Acer XR34 2CK, 75Hz, a nice widescreen 21 by 9 aspect ratio, and a decent pixel ratio as well. Now some people who play mainly esports games would rather have something that has a much higher refresh rate, either 144Hz and above. Now there is one issue I have with 240Hz monitors. I feel that these monitors really don't have much of a place outside of esports titles. Now the reason I say this is because I've benchmarked a lot of games and never really seen games hit 240 frames per second outside of esports titles. So are these monitors specifically and exclusively for esports players and who want the most competitive edge they can get? So I'm looking at this Asus ROG Swift, the PG258Q. That goes for £535.49 in the UK. It's a hell of a lot of money, but mainly because of the G-Sync module that's implanted in it. Now if you go to a FreeSync version, what's from AOC, sorry, you're looking at £400, so not too bad, but these monitors are still quite expensive. And now if you're someone that actually plays more than esports titles, is this really the monitor for you? So that's what I want to look into. So what I'm showing you now is Counter-Strike Global Offensive, a very popular esports title and very easy to run. As you can see, I'm getting an average of 341 frames per second here, and now this is something that's easily achieved with mid-range hardware such as the AMD RX 580 and Nvidia GTX 1080. So you don't need incredibly powerful hardware to achieve performance like this. If you even have a look at my GPU load in the top left hand corner, you can see that I'm only at 50% usage, and that's because the GPU is insanely fast and my CPU can't keep up with the workload. And it just goes to show you that invested in such a high-end GPU to play these kind of games is a bit of a waste of money, to be honest. Now what I'm going to do is go through around about 10 games outside what's considered an esports title, and let's just see how close I can get to achieving 240 frames per second. So I'm going to start with Dirt 4 here. The game will be ran at 1920 by 1080 using ultra settings with the highest amount of anti-aliasing available, in this case 8 times, and I'm achieving an average of 176 frames per second in this game. So obviously a very high frame rate, but you know, quite a bit away from achieving 240 frames per second, which would be required to take advantage of that 240Hz monitor. So I'm going to move on now to Rise of the Tomb Raider, again at ultra preset at 1080p. Now this game is quite demanding in its own right, and as you can see, even with an overclocked GTX 1080Ti, I am just about getting an average of 128 frames per second, which is not even close to what the 240Hz and 240 FPS requirement to take advantage of these kind of monitors. So I'm just going to move on now to Resident Evil 7. This is quite a recent game, not very demanding at the low resolutions, it has to be said, and I'm actually averaging 209 frames per second, which is a lot better than what I was expecting. So that's not actually too bad for a high-end GPU at that resolution. It's quite hard to exceed 200 frames per second in most games, but Resident Evil 7 holding up pretty well. Moving on to Formula 1 2016. Now this game again is maxed out with the ultra preset, and I'm averaging 159 frames per second. You know, very far away from that 240 frames per second magic number that I'm looking for. And it just goes to show you that even with very high-end hardware, even at resolution like 1080p, achieving 240 frames per second is not something that's easily done. Okay, moving on. Now we're looking at The Division, and I'm using the ultra preset, and I'm averaging 146 frames per second. Now the Division is considered quite a demanding game, but even at 1080p with an overclocked GTX 1080Ti, again nowhere near close to achieving 240 frames per second. So you're starting to see a bit of a trend here. I'm going to move on now to Mass Effect Andromeda. Now this is quite a recent game with the Frostbite Engine 3, I believe, and I'm able to achieve an average, which using the Ultra preset, of 166 frames per second. That's not bad by any standard. It's just nowhere near close to that 240 frames per second magic number that we're looking for. So you know, the trend continues, and it just goes to show that owning a 240Hz monitor, even with high-end hardware at a low resolution, you're still going to have to play esports titles to really get the most out of that monitor. That 240Hz refresh rate is pretty much going to waste in most games. Moving on to something I'm quite familiar with a lot of people, which is Battlefield 1. Now I'm currently using the Ultra preset on a Conquest mode 64 player map, and I think this is the Argonne Forest area. It's decent level, and I'm getting an average of 164 frames per second here. Again, nowhere near close to that 240 frames per second mark. So the trend continues. So I'm going to move on to The Witcher 3 now, and I'm using completely maxed out settings. I am using Nvidia GTX 1080Ti, so yes, GameWorks features are enabled, but that doesn't hinder this graphics card in any way. Now I'm able to achieve an average of 139 frames per second, and I'm actually in Novigrad right now, which is considered quite a demanding area in the game, so it's a good place to actually run this benchmark for you know, a worst case scenario. And as you can see, nowhere near close to that 240 frames per second mark again. So let's move on to Deus Ex Mankind Divided. Now this game's very demanding, but it's still worth trying out what you would achieve with some high-end hardware at a low resolution, and I'm averaging 109 frames per second at the Ultra preset with temporal anti-aliasing. No multi-sample anti-aliasing was used because this game is demanding enough, and as you can see, I'm achieving nowhere near close to the 240 frames per second mark. So there you go. If you're really gonna invest in a high refresh rate monitor, you're pretty much best stopping at 144 Hz at the max. Go up to 165, but I don't see much sense going over 200 and 165 unless you are just strictly an esports enthusiast, and that's when it would make the most sense. But the gold standard for me really is 2560 by 1440 144 Hz. That gives you great quality in picture, and you can achieve that comfortably with you know, a high-end GPU, or maybe even two high-end GPUs if you need it. So there you go, guys. That's pretty much my take on monitors of the 244 Hz range. Really doesn't seem to make much sense outside of an esports title, even with very high-end hardware. So it's something to consider if you were planning on getting one. Doesn't matter how much GPU power you want to throw at it, you're not really going to get too close to achieving that magic number unless it's an esports title, unfortunately. So there you go, guys. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video, and as always, thanks for watching.